At our biggest family gathering, my parents refused to seat me at the main table. They dragged me to a corner next to the gifts and handed me a roll of tape like hired help. My mother told me to stay out of the way, while my father warned me not to draw attention. They had no idea I had just received a notification that would shift the power dynamic of this entire family before dessert was served. Sloane Barrett adjusted the cuffs of her navy blazer as she handed her keys to the valet. The driveway of the rental property in Lake Briar was already lined with cars that cost more than my first apartment. This was not our family home. My parents, Frank and Diane, had sold the house I grew up in 3 years ago to downsize, or so they claimed. But tonight they had rented this sprawling lakeside estate for $4,000 a night to throw a party that was less about celebration and more about desperate social climbing. I was 32 years old. I ran a division at Northline Operations that handled logistics for interstate supply chains. I managed a budget of $12 million a year. Yet, as I walked up the stone steps to the massive oak front doors, I felt that familiar constriction in my chest, the regression that happens to adult children when they step back into the gravity well of toxic parents. I was not a localized director of operations here. I was just Sloane, the reliable one, the invisible one. The door was already open, spilling golden light and the hum of polite, expensive conversation into the cool night air. I stepped inside. The foyer was grand, with a vaulted ceiling and a chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of crystal. Before I could even scan the room for a friendly face, my mother materialized. Diane did not greet me with a hug. She did not smile with the warmth of a mother seeing her eldest daughter. Instead, her eyes darted immediately to my shoes, then up to my blazer, and finally settled on my face with a look of mild disappointment. She gripped my elbow with a strength that belied her slender frame. "You are late," she whispered, her voice tight. "And is that what you are wearing? It looks so severe. Sloane, everyone else is in cocktail attire." I came straight from the office. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "I told you I would be—" "Well, it cannot be helped now," she said, steering me physically away from the main archway that led to the living room where the guests were mingling. "Come with me. We have a situation with the gifts." I allowed myself to be guided. It was a reflex honed over 3 decades. We bypassed the waiters circulating with trays of champagne. We bypassed the clusters of laughing guests. Diane marched me toward the back of the open-plan floor, past the towering floral arrangements, to a small, circular table shoved awkwardly into the corner near the swinging door that led to the kitchen. It was clearly not a guest table. It was smaller, unadorned by the heavy linens covering the others. On it sat a stack of envelopes, a pile of gift boxes that were teetering dangerously, and a few stray ribbons. "Here," Diane said, releasing my arm. She reached under the table and pulled out a roll of clear packing tape and a black marker. She slapped them onto the surface next to a printed spreadsheet. The coordinator backed out at the last minute, and I cannot trust the catering staff with the inventory. You need to log everything. I looked at the tape, then I looked at the room. "Mom, I am a guest. Can't the event planner handle this?" Diane's smile was thin and brittle. "The event planner is busy managing the flow of dinner. We need family eyes on this. Just sit here and make sure the cards are taped securely to the boxes so they do not get separated. Check the names off this list as they come in. It is simple." She pulled out a chair. It was not one of the padded, high-backed chairs from the dining set. It was a folding chair, likely retrieved from a closet, with a metal back that looked as cold as her tone. "Sit here for now," she said, her voice dropping to a hush as she glanced over her shoulder to ensure none of the important guests were watching. "It is better this way. You will be out of the way. It helps the flow of the room." Out of the way. The phrase hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, my father, Frank, appeared from the crowd. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, holding a Scotch glass, but I knew the telltale signs of his anxiety. He was sweating slightly at the temples. He saw me standing by the service door and nodded. Not at me, but at the arrangement. Good, Frank said, stepping into our little corner. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask about my job. He leaned in, smelling of expensive cologne and old nerves. "Sloan, listen to me. We have the investors from the Hearthstone Group here tonight. This needs to go perfectly. When you are done logging the gifts, just stay put. All right? Don't wander around the tables making small talk. Don't make people ask questions about what you do or why you are not married yet. We want the focus on Tessa tonight." "So I am hidden," I said. It was not a question. "You are helping," Frank corrected, his eyes already drifting back to the party. "Just keep your head down. We appreciate it." He patted my shoulder. 2 quick, dismissive taps, and turned back to the room, instantly switching on a charming smile as he greeted a man in a gray suit. I looked at the chair, I looked at the roll of tape. A slow, cold realization washed over me. This was not an emergency request for help. This was a quarantine. They had calculated this. They knew I would come, and they had decided exactly where I fit in their tableau. I was not a prop for their success. I was the stagehand who needed to remain unseen in the wings. I sat down. The chair was low, making me feel physically smaller than everyone else standing in the room. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the entire party, but I was separated from it by an invisible wall of social stratification. Then, the front door opened again, and a hush fell over the room, followed by a ripple of appreciative murmurs. Tessa walked in. My younger sister was 26, beautiful, and vibrant. She wore a shimmering silver gown that caught every photon of light in the room. She was the golden child, the one my parents had invested all their emotional and financial capital into. She laughed, throwing her head back as she entered with a group of 4 friends, looking like she owned the world. Frank and Diane rushed to her, beaming. This was the show. This was the product. Tessa made her rounds, hugging people, accepting compliments. Eventually, her group drifted toward the back of the room, toward the bar, and inevitably, toward me. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes didn't light up with recognition. They narrowed slightly with confusion, then cleared with understanding as she saw the list and the tape. "Oh, hey," Tessa chirped, waving a manicured hand. She turned to her friends, a group of young professionals who looked like they had been styled for a magazine shoot. "Guys, this is my older sister, Sloan." One of the men, a tall guy with perfect hair, smiled politely. "Nice to meet you. Are you joining us for drinks?" Tessa answered before I could open my mouth. "Oh, no. Sloan is obsessed with organization. She is basically handling all the logistics for Mom and Dad tonight. She loves this stuff. Behind the scenes, making the magic happen. Right, Sloan?" She didn't wait for an answer. She just smiled, a dazzling, empty smile, and ushered her friends away toward the bar. "Come on, let's get drinks before the speeches start." Logistics. She made it sound like a hobby, a quirky little personality trait, rather than a career I had built from the ground up. She reduced my entire professional existence to taping envelopes onto boxes at a party I was supposed to be enjoying. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I felt a strange detachment, a numbness that was protecting me from the sting of humiliation. I reached for the first envelope, a thick cream-colored card from the Peterson family, and lined it up with the silver-wrapped box. I tore a strip of tape. The sound was sharp and loud in my ears, though lost under the music of the party. Zip, tear, stick. I did it again. Zip, tear, stick. I was a machine. I was exactly what they wanted me to be. Efficient, silent, invisible. A shadow fell over the table. I looked up, expecting perhaps an aunt or a cousin coming to pity me. It was a waiter. He was young, dressed in a black vest and white shirt, holding a pitcher of water. He looked tired. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper used between service staff. "The manager wants to know if you have the updated seating chart for the main table. We are short 1 chair." I stared at him. He didn't see a guest. He didn't see the sister of the guest of honor. He saw a woman in a blazer sitting at a work table near the kitchen door with a clipboard and a roll of tape. He saw a coworker. For a second, I wanted to laugh. It would have been a bitter, jagged sound. I wanted to stand up and shout that I earned more in a month than this entire party cost. I wanted to throw the tape at my mother's perfectly coiffed head. But I didn't. Sloane Barrett does not make scenes. Sloane Barrett solves problems. I am not the coordinator, I said calmly. But the chart is over there, on the sideboard. The waiter blinked, realizing his mistake as he took a closer look at my jewelry, which was understated but clearly real gold. Oh, I am so sorry. Ma'am, I thought... It is fine, I said, cutting him off. Do you have a bottle of sparkling water? A cold one? Yes, of course, right away. He scurried off, terrified he had offended a guest, leaving me alone again in my corner. I set the pen down. The humiliation was total. My parents had successfully engineered an environment where my own status was so degraded that the hired help felt comfortable asking me for instructions. They had stripped me of my identity as their daughter and replaced it with a function. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. It was my personal device, but it was linked to the secure servers at Northline Operations. I wasn't checking it to text a friend or to scroll through social media to dissociate from the pain. I was checking it because, unlike this family, my systems respected me. The screen lit up. I had 3 notifications. 2 were standard flagged emails from the Asia-Pacific logistics team regarding shipping container delays, but the third one was a security alert. Priority Level 1. Unauthorized access attempt detected. User credentials. F. Barrett. My father. I stared at the screen. My father had access to a very specific, very limited observer account on my company's platform because I had helped him structure a personal loan 2 years ago using some collateral data. He was never supposed to use it for anything else, and certainly not at 7 in the evening on a Saturday during a party. I unlocked the phone and tapped into the admin console. My fingers moved instinctively. I wasn't just checking email anymore. I was looking at the logs. Someone was trying to pull a proof of funds document generated on Northline letterhead, and they were trying to do it right now, from an IP address that geolocated to this very house. I looked up across the room. Frank was standing near the fireplace, laughing with the man he had identified as an investor from Hearthstone, but his hand was in his pocket, and he kept glancing down at his own phone, tapping the screen surreptitiously. My mother was circling them, looking tense. The waiter returned with my sparkling water, placing it gently on the wobbly table next to the tape dispenser. "Here you are, ma'am." "Thank you," I said, not looking at him. I took a sip of the cold water. The bubbles bit at my tongue. They put me by the gift table because they thought I was safe. They thought I was a utility, a tool to be used when needed and stored away when inconvenient. They thought that by sitting me here, they had neutralized me. I looked down at the security alert again. Access pending approval. My thumb hovered over the red deny button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. I placed the phone face up on the table, right next to the list of guests I was supposed to be checking off. If they wanted me to work, I would work. But they had forgotten that in my line of work, the person who controls the logistics controls the outcome. I picked up the roll of tape again. Zip, tear, stick. Let them think I was just wrapping boxes. They had no idea I was about to wrap up their entire scheme. The tape dispenser made a sharp, rhythmic rasping sound every time I pulled a strip free. It was a monotonous noise, one that seemed to underscore the absurdity of my position. Sitting there, smoothing clear plastic over the edges of expensive cardstock. I felt the weight of a decade of similar moments settling onto my shoulders. This was not an anomaly. This was the architecture of my life within the Barrett family. I looked down at my hands. These were the same hands that, just 4 days ago, had signed off on a multi-million-dollar vendor contract for Northline Operations. At work, I was the director of strategic logistics. I managed a team of 45 people. I was the person the CEO called when a container ship got stuck in a canal, or when a strike in a foreign port threatened to disrupt the supply chain for 3 major automotive manufacturers. My decisions moved literal mountains of steel and commerce across oceans. But within these walls, under the gaze of Frank and Diane, my title evaporated, to them. My competence was not a source of pride. It was a utility. It was running water or electricity, something you only noticed if it stopped working, and something you certainly did not thank. I remembered the summer I turned 28. That was the year Frank had nearly lost his shirt on a speculative real estate deal in Florida. He had leveraged our childhood home without telling Diane, convinced he was going to flip a swamp into a resort. When the deal went south, he hadn't gone to a lawyer or a financial advisor. He had called me. I remembered sitting at their kitchen table until 3 a.m, night after night, surrounded by terrifying demand letters and foreclosure notices. I used my bonus from Northline, money I had been saving for a down payment on my own place, to bridge the gap. I restructured his debt. I negotiated with the creditors. Using the ruthless, dispassionate communication style I had honed in corporate boardrooms, I saved them. I saved his reputation. And when it was over, when the house was safe and the debt was consolidated into something manageable, Frank had clapped me on the shoulder at Sunday dinner and said, "It is good you have a head for paperwork. Sloan, your mother and I are just too creative for the fine print." Paperwork. He called saving his financial life paperwork. That was the narrative. Sloan is the boring one. Sloan likes rules. Sloan is safe. I watched Tessa across the room now. She was holding a martini glass, laughing at something a young man in a velvet tuxedo was whispering to her. Tessa was the creative one. She had started 5 different businesses in the last 6 years, a jewelry line, a lifestyle blog, a personal shopping service. None of them had lasted more than 18 months. Each time one failed, leaving behind a trail of unpaid vendors and confused customers. I was the one who quietly stepped in to dissolve the LLCAs, pay off the small claims, and ensure the Barrett name remained untarnished. They never introduced me as the person who fixed the problems. They introduced me as the person who served the family. A guest approached the table, a woman I recognized vaguely as a member of my mother's country club. She held a small, elegantly wrapped box. "Oh, just leave it there?" she asked, looking down at me. "Yes, I will take care of it," I said, forcing a polite nod. "You are such a dear," she cooed. "Diane always says you are so helpful. I do not know what she would do without her little assistant." Little assistant. I took the box. My grip on it was tight enough to dent the cardboard. That was another part of the lie. They deliberately obscured what I actually did for a living. If they admitted I was a high-powered executive, it would raise uncomfortable questions. Why was the executive daughter sitting in the corner? Why was the executive daughter not the one being celebrated? And more dangerously, if I was successful on my own terms, it meant I did not need them. So they shrank me. When people asked what I did, Diane would wave her hand vaguely and say, "Oh, Sloan works in an office. She does administrative things, computers, spreadsheets, that sort of thing. It keeps her busy." They made me sound like a receptionist at a dental practice. It wasn't just to elevate Tessa by comparison, though that was part of it. It was to maintain the hierarchy. In their world, they were the monarchs. Tessa was the princess, and I was the steward. The steward does not get a seat at the banquet. The steward stands by the wall and ensures the wine keeps flowing. I checked the time on my phone again. The logs on the screen showed the unauthorized access attempt was still pending. My father hadn't tried again yet. He was probably waiting for a moment when he thought I was distracted by the cake cutting or the speeches. He didn't realize that managing this party was second nature to me because, in many ways, I was already running it. I looked around the room, noting the floral arrangements, white lilies and hydrangeas. I knew they cost $12,000 because I was the one who had reviewed the invoice when my mother claimed her credit card was acting funny last week. I had called the florist, sorted out the payment issue, and ensured delivery was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. I looked at the waitstaff. I knew the catering company owner. I had recommended him to Frank because his firm handled corporate lunches for Northline. I knew the menu by heart because Diane had sent me 3 drafts, asking me to proofread them, which actually meant rewriting them to sound more sophisticated. I was the engine room of this entire evening, yet I was parked next to the kitchen door like a piece of luggage. For years, I had told myself this was simply the burden of being the eldest, the responsible one. I told myself that they relied on me because they trusted me. I told myself that love sometimes looked like labor. But sitting here, watching the light fracture through the crystal chandeliers, I realized that was a lie I had used to sedate myself. This wasn't trust. This was containment. They didn't want me to shine because if I shone, I became visible. And if I became visible, I became a person with agency, rather than a resource to be mined. They needed me to be the invisible infrastructure of their lives. They needed me to be the floorboards they walked on, essential, supportive, and completely beneath notice. A movement near the main entrance caught my eye. It wasn't a guest. It was one of the private security guards Frank had hired for the evening. There were 3 of them, large men in dark suits with earpieces, standing at the perimeter of the room. Usually, security at these events looked outward. They watched the doors. They watched the uninvited. They watched the perimeter to ensure the privacy of the wealthy people inside. But this guard wasn't watching the door. He was watching me. He was standing near a potted ficus about 30 feet away, his body angled slightly toward the gift table. When our eyes met, he didn't look away immediately. He held my gaze for a fraction of a second too long, a look of assessment, cold and professional, before pretending to scan the crowd. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down my spine. I looked toward the other side of the room. A second guard was positioned near the hallway that led to the bathrooms. He, too, seemed to have his attention drifted inward, toward my corner. Why? I was the daughter of the host. I was the dull, helpful sister taping boxes. Why would the security detail be briefed to watch me? Unless they weren't just here to keep people out. Unless they were here to keep someone in, or to stop someone from making a scene. "Don't do anything to make people pay attention," Frank had whispered to me. I had thought he meant don't embarrass us with your bad fashion or your awkwardness, but looking at the guard, whose hand was resting casually near his waist, I began to wonder if the warning was more literal. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. It wasn't a security alert this time. It was a message from my CFO. "David. Sloan, are you seeing this? The system just flagged a request for a Level 4 asset transfer. It is coming from your admin credentials. I thought you were at a party." My heart hammered against my ribs. Level 4 meant liquidation. It meant moving hard assets or intellectual property rights. It was not something you did by accident. It was not something you did to check a credit score. I looked across the room at my father. He was no longer smiling. He was standing with the man from the Hearthstone group, and they were both looking at Tessa. Tessa was nodding vigorously, her face flushed with excitement. Then, almost in unison, they turned. 3 pairs of eyes, Frank, the investor, and Tessa, locked onto me across the crowded room. They didn't look like family. They looked like predators waiting for the trap to spring. The pieces of the past 10 years clicked together in my mind. The isolation, the minimizing of my career, the way they kept me busy with low-level tasks while they made high-stakes gambles. They had groomed me for this. They had conditioned me to sign things without reading, to fix things without asking, to accept that my role was to bleed so they could feed. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They thought they had seated a secretary at the gift table. They didn't realize they had seated the only person in the room who knew how to shut down the entire grid. I picked up the black marker. I didn't write a gift tag. I uncapped it and drew a thick black line through the name on the top envelope. It was a reflex, a way to steady my hand. The guard took a step closer. I took a sip of water. I didn't move. I didn't run. I just sat there, waiting for the inevitable approach. Finally understanding that the danger wasn't outside the house. It was holding the microphone, preparing to make a toast. The pile of gifts on the table had grown into a precarious mountain of silver and gold paper, a testament to the wealth of the guests my parents had curated for this evening. There were boxes from Tiffany, bags from Neiman Marcus, and envelopes that undoubtedly held checks with 4 or 5 zeros written on them. But amidst this shimmering display of social capital, one object stood out like a drop of ink in a glass of milk. It had been placed not by a guest, but by someone who had slipped in through the service door while I was distracted with the inventory list. I had not seen it arrive. I simply turned around after stacking a set of crystal goblets, and there it was. It was a flat, rectangular box, roughly the size of a legal portfolio. It was wrapped in heavy, matte navy paper with no ribbon, no bow, and no festive ornamentation. It looked severe. It looked official. I reached out and touched the corner. It was heavy, dense, and unyielding. Taped to the center was a white card. The handwriting on it was not the frantic scrawl of my father, nor was it the looped, performative calligraphy of my mother. It was precise, blocky, and completely unfamiliar. For Sloane, just that. No love, Mom and Dad, no happy celebration, just my name, written with the mechanical detachment of a court summons. I felt a prickle of unease at the back of my neck, a primitive warning system that had evolved over 3 decades of living in the Barrett household. In our family, gifts were never just objects, they were transactions. A car meant you had to drive Grandma to her appointments every Sunday. A tuition check meant you studied the major Frank chose. A piece of jewelry meant you wore it to the events Diane selected, regardless of your own plans. But this felt different. This did not feel like a bribe. It felt like a verdict. You found it. I jumped slightly. Diane was standing right at the edge of the table, her hand resting on the back of my folding chair. She was smiling, but her eyes were not participating in the expression. They were scanning my face, looking for a reaction, measuring my compliance levels. "Who is this from?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "There is no card inside the envelope." "It is from all of us," Diane said, her voice airy and light, the tone she used when she was lying to neighbors about why our lawn service had been fired. "It is something special, something necessary." I moved to slide a finger under the paper's edge. "No!" Diane's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin, sharp and deliberate. She froze, realizing she had broken character. She released me instantly, smoothing the fabric of my blazer with a fluttery, nervous motion. "Not yet, darling. Not here in the corner. We want you to open it later. When everyone can see, it is a big moment for you. We want to celebrate it properly." "Since when do you celebrate me at Tessa's parties?" I asked. "Do not be petty. Sloane, it does not become you," she snapped, then pivoted back to sweetness. "Just keep it safe. Do not let it get buried under the fondue sets and blenders. Keep it right here, next to you." She tapped the box once, hard, and then drifted back into the crowd, her sequined dress catching the light like armor. I stared at the navy box. Keep it safe. 10 minutes later, Tessa floated by. She was on her 3rd or 4th cocktail. Her cheeks flushed a deep rose. She leaned against the table, her hip bumping against the stack of envelopes I had meticulously organized. "Is that it?" she asked, nodding sloppily at the navy box. "Mom says I have to wait to open it," I said, watching her carefully. Tessa was a terrible liar, unlike our parents. She had never needed to develop the skill because she had never faced a consequence she couldn't smile her way out of. Tessa giggled, a sound that grated on my nerves. "God, you are going to be so relieved. Sloane, seriously, it is going to take so much pressure off you. Mom and Dad said this will finally make you safe." "Safe," I repeated the word. "Am I in danger, Tessa?" She blinked, her eyes unfocusing for a second. "What? No, I mean, safe from, everything. The stress, the work. You know how you're always complaining about being tired? Well, after tonight, you won't have to worry about any of that heavy lifting anymore. We are handling it. We are protecting you." Protecting me. The word sounded alien coming from her mouth. In the Barrett lexicon, protection usually meant control. When they protected me from a bad boyfriend, they isolated me. When they protected me from financial mistakes, they took over my accounts. "Tessa," I started, but she was already pushing off the table. "I have to go find Grant," she said, waving a hand. "Just wait for the toast. It is going to be epic." She disappeared into the throng of bodies. I sat there, the word safe echoing in my head. They were planning to relieve me of my burdens. They were handling the heavy lifting. I turned the navy box over in my hands. It was the size of a document binder. Suddenly, the front door opened, and the air in the room seemed to shift. A man walked in who was distinctly not a party guest. He was short, balding, and wearing a beige suit that looked like it had been purchased off the rack at a discount department store. He carried a worn leather briefcase and clutched a manila folder to his chest. He didn't look at the decor. He didn't look for a drink. He stood in the entryway, scanning the room with the desperate, searching look of a process server or a low-rent notary public. He wasn't here for the fun. He was here for business. I watched him interact with the greeter. He said something, gesturing with his folder. The greeter looked confused and pointed directly at me. The man in the beige suit adjusted his glasses and took a step in my direction. Before he could take a second step, Frank intercepted him. My father moved with a speed I hadn't seen in years. He cut through a group of laughing doctors, grabbed the man by the elbow, and practically dragged him into the shadow of a large potted palm tree. Frank's face was a mask of fury for a split second before he composed himself. He whispered something intense into the man's ear. The man looked startled, apologized, and pointed at his watch. Frank nodded aggressively and steered him toward the library, a room that was strictly off-limits to the guests tonight. As they disappeared, Frank looked back. He looked right at the gift table. He checked to see if I had seen. I looked down at my inventory list instantly, pretending to be engrossed in checking off the Miller family's donation. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. That man was a notary, or a lawyer, or someone whose job was to witness a signature. Why bring a notary to a party at 9 o'clock at night? Because you need a signature that cannot wait until Monday morning. I reached for my water glass. The ice had melted, leaving a watery ring on the tablecloth. I lifted it to my lips, parched from the adrenaline coursing through my system. Then I stopped. The glass had been sitting there for 20 minutes, unattended, while I was distracted by Diane, while I was watching the security guard, while I was staring at the navy box. It will make you safe. If they wanted a signature from me, a signature I would never give willingly, a signature that would relieve me of my burdens, how would they get it? They would need me pliable, confused, or unconscious. I looked at the water. It was clear, innocent. But in a house where my own mother smiled while trapping me in a corner, nothing was innocent. I set the glass down. I did not drink it. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy but steady. I walked to the nearest waiter, a young woman carrying a tray of appetizers. "I need a bottle of water," I said. "Sealed, plastic, do not pour it into a glass." "We have Perrier and Fiji at the bar, ma'am," she said. "Please bring me one. I will wait here." I watched her go to the bar. I watched the bartender hand her a cold blue bottle. I watched her walk it back to me. I checked the seal. It was unbroken. I cracked it open myself, the plastic ring snapping with a sharp, reassuring sound. I took a long drink, the cold liquid shocking my system back into high alert. I was not being paranoid. I was being observant. I sat back down and pulled out my phone. I angled it carefully, hiding the screen from the room. I opened the camera app. First, I took a picture of the navy box. I zoomed in on the handwriting. Next, I took a picture of the man in the beige suit who was now emerging from the library, wiping sweat from his forehead, and taking a position near the back wall, waiting. Finally, I took a picture of the open glass of water I had abandoned. I was building a file. My phone vibrated. A new notification from the Northline security bot. Alert: admin override initiated. Two-factor authentication bypass requested via trusted device proximity. My blood ran cold. Trusted device proximity. They weren't trying to hack my password anymore. They were trying to use a localized override. That meant the device trying to access the system was physically close to my phone. It was here, in this room. Someone at this party had a laptop or a tablet that was pinging my phone, trying to bridge the connection to the company servers. I looked at the navy box again. It wasn't just paper inside. If that box contained transfer documents, and the digital system was being primed to accept a transfer of ownership or authority simultaneously, then this wasn't just a coercion, it was a coup. They were going to make me sign the physical papers in front of a notary, perhaps under duress, perhaps publicly where I couldn't make a scene, and use that signature to validate the digital theft happening in the background. Monnay sa hinchi Antoine Hun, Tessa had said, safe from the responsibility of my shares, safe from the burden of my authority, safe from the money they so desperately wanted to control. I looked at the time. It was 9:15. Diane was tapping a spoon against a champagne glass near the fireplace. The sharp ting-ting-ting cut through the chatter. The room fell silent. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Diane announced, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. "We have such a special night ahead. But first, we have a little surprise for our eldest daughter, Sloane." She pointed at me. Every head in the room turned. I gripped the cold plastic of the water bottle. The trap was not closing. It had already snapped shut. All that was left was for me to chew through the leg or let them drag me away. I put my hand on the navy box. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Let's see what you bought me." The spotlight that Diane had briefly cast upon me flickered and died just as quickly. After announcing the surprise, she did not invite me to the stage or ask me to stand and be recognized. Instead, she simply gestured to the corner where I sat, framed by the service door and the trash can, and said, "Sloane is guarding the treasures tonight. She insists on handling the details personally." The heads that had turned toward me swiveled back to the center of the room almost instantly. My mother had effectively cast me not as the recipient of honor, but as the hired security for her actual priorities. She had turned my exclusion into a personality quirk. I released the navy box, leaving it unopened on the table as instructed. The air in the room grew warmer as more bodies pressed in, the noise level rising to a roar of networking and forced laughter. From my vantage point, I was invisible to the crowd, yet I had a panoramic view of their hypocrisy. Frank drifted near my table again, this time with a tall, silver-haired man I did not recognize. The man looked at me, then looked at the table, confusion knitting his brow. "Is this your other daughter, Frank?" the man asked, his tone polite but puzzled. He extended a hand toward me. "I do not believe we have met." Before I could stand or speak, Frank stepped smoothly between us. Using his body as a physical barrier, he clamped a hand on the man's shoulder and steered him slightly to the left, angling him away from my table. "This is Sloane," Frank said, his voice dropping to that confidential, just-between-us pitch he used when closing a sale. "She is a bit of an introvert. You know how it is. Some people thrive in the spotlight like Tessa, and others, well, they prefer the shadows. Sloane likes to be behind the scenes. She gets overwhelmed if she has to engage with the main group." I sat frozen, my hand still resting on the water bottle, overwhelmed. I managed a logistics division that operated 24 hours a day across 6 time zones. I negotiated contracts with union leaders who shouted for sport. I had fired people twice my age without blinking. But here, in my father's narrative, I was a fragile, socially anxious recluse who needed to be protected from a cocktail party. "Ah, I understand," the man said, casting a pitying glance over Frank's shoulder at me. "My niece is the same way. Very shy. It is good you found a role for her tonight so she feels included." "Exactly," Frank said, beaming. "We just want her to feel useful." They walked away. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just an insult. It was a tactical maneuver. By painting me as incompetent and shy, Frank was preemptively discrediting anything I might say later. If I spoke up about business, if I claimed ownership of my own success, the guests would view it through the lens Frank had just polished, the delusions of a shy girl trying too hard. A moment later, Tessa materialized out of the crowd. She did not look at me. She was looking at her reflection in the darkened window pane behind me, fixing a stray lock of hair. Without turning, she swung her heavy designer handbag off her shoulder and dropped it onto the table, right on top of the neatly stacked envelopes I had just organized. The heavy buckle slammed into the paper, sliding the stack toward the edge. "Watch this for me, will you?" Tessa said, still admiring her reflection. "It is getting heavy, and I need my hands free for the photos." She didn't ask. She issued a command. To her, I was not a sister. I was a coat check girl who happened to share her DNA. "Tessa," I said, my voice sharp, "put it somewhere else. I am not your locker." She finally turned, blinking her false lashes at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "What is your problem? You are just sitting there. You are literally sitting at the table where things go. Just make sure nobody steals it. It is a Birkin. Sloan. It costs more than your car." "It costs $12,000, I said, correcting her. "And my car costs $65,000. Do the math." Tessa rolled her eyes, a gesture so practiced it looked painful. "God, you are so gauche when you talk about money. Just watch the bag. Do it for the family, okay? Mom is already stressed enough without you being difficult." She flounced away before I could shove the bag off the table. I stared at the leather purse. It was burnt orange, a color I hated. I realized with a sick jolt that I recognized the bag. I had paid the credit card bill for it 3 months ago when Frank had called me, claiming there had been a banking mix-up and they needed a temporary float to avoid an overdraft fee. I was guarding the bag I had bought for the sister who despised me, at the party where I was being erased. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I leaned back, trying to control my breathing. That was when the conversation drifted over the partition behind me. The gift table was positioned near a decorative screen that separated the service area from a small alcove where guests could take private calls. 2 voices. One was Frank, the other was the man from Hearthstone, the investor. "The infrastructure is solid," Frank was saying, his voice low and urgent. "That is why we need the transfer done tonight. The logistics network is the key asset. Without that, the valuation drops by 40%. "And you are sure you have control over the shipping lanes?" the investor asked. "My analysts say that Northline operations is impenetrable. They have strict compliance protocols." "Northline is not the issue," Frank replied, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "We have a direct line to the signatory authority. It is a family business. Effectively, we just need to move the rights into the holding company, Hearthstone Holdings, and then license them back. It is a paper shuffle. But we need the signature tonight to hit the quarterly filing deadline on Monday." "And the daughter? The older one?" "Sloan?" Frank laughed. It was a dismissive, short sound. "Sloan does what she is told. She is a good girl. She understands that her role is to support the legacy. She will sign. She always signs." I stared at the wall. They weren't just stealing money. They were trying to commandeer my entire professional infrastructure. They were selling access to my supply chain, my vendor contracts, my life's work, and passing it off as their own family asset. They needed my signature to authorize a transfer of rights, likely disguised as a power of attorney or a beneficiary designation, that would give them legal control over my executive decisions. "Sloan, darling." I snapped my head up. Aunt Linda was standing in front of me. She was my mother's sister, a woman who believed a woman's value expired the moment she turned 30 without a ring on her finger. "Hello, Aunt Linda?" I said. She looked at the gift table, then at me, then at the single folding chair. She pursed her lips. "Well," she said, clutching her glass of white wine, "at least you are making yourself useful. It is good to see you pitching in." "I am a guest, Linda," I said. "Of course you are," she said, patting my hand with a cold, damp palm. "But look at Tessa. She is radiant tonight. That dress, the way she commands the room. She really is the face of the family, isn't she?" "She is certainly loud," I muttered. Linda sighed, a long, tragic exhalation. "You know, your mother worries about you. Sloan, she tells me how hard you work at that office job of yours, all those hours. And for what? You come to these parties alone. You sit in the corner. It really hurts the family image. You know, people talk. They wonder why the Barretts cannot get their eldest daughter settled. It makes things look unstable. Unstable, I repeated. Yes, a woman needs a foundation, a husband, a home, not just paperwork. She gestured vaguely at the list of gifts. But do not worry. Diane says they are setting up something tonight that will fix all of that for you. A trust, or a fund? Something to make sure you are taken care of so you do not have to work so hard. Then maybe you will have time to find a husband. She smiled, a cruel, pitying expression, and walked away. The narrative was complete. To the family, I was a failure who needed saving. To the investors, I was a rubber stamp who needed exploiting. My phone buzzed against the table surface. It was a violent, sustained vibration. I looked down, a text from David, my CFO. Urgent. Sloan, I just got a red flag from legal. Someone is trying to execute a rapid authority transfer on the Northline logistical database. They are using your emergency bypass codes. This requires a physical signature confirmation to be uploaded within 1 hour. Are you doing this? 1 hour. That was the timeline. That was why the notary was here. That was why the box was here. They were going to make me sign the paper in the Navy box. The notary would stamp it. They would upload it, and they would seize control of my company's assets before the clock struck midnight. I picked up the phone. My fingers flew across the screen. No, I typed. I am not authorizing anything. Lock the system. Initiate Protocol 0. Protocol 0? David replied instantly. That shuts down all external ports. It will freeze the Asia shipment. It will cost us $50,000 an hour in penalties. Do it, I typed. Log every attempt. Trace the IP. And David, do not pick up if my father calls you. I hit send. Sloan! The voice was sharp as a whip crack. Diane was standing 5 feet away. She had broken away from a group of guests and was staring at me with open hostility. Put that phone away, she hissed, stepping into my personal space. You look ridiculous, hunched over a screen like a teenager while the rest of us are socializing. We have guests. Sloan. Important guests. I am working, Mother, I said, not looking up as I confirmed the lockout command. That is exactly the problem, Diane said, her voice rising just enough for the nearby waiter to hear, but not the guests. You are always working. You turn everything into a transaction. You cannot just be a part of this family, can you? You have to make it about your little job. Stop trying to prove you are important. Tonight is about family. Put the phone down and do not ruin the atmosphere. I looked up at her then. I looked at her perfectly set hair, her diamond earrings that I knew were insured under a policy I paid for, and the desperate, hungry look in her eyes. You are right, I said slowly. I should not make family about work. I locked the phone and placed it face down on the table, right next to the Navy box. Good, Diane said, smoothing her dress, thinking she had won. Now, smile. The speeches are starting, and we are going to open your gift. She didn't understand. I wasn't putting the phone down because I surrendered. I was putting it down because the weapon had already been fired. She told me not to make family about work, but as I watched Frank guide the investor toward the podium, checking his watch with a nervous tick, I realized the truth. I wasn't the one making family about work. They were the ones who had turned their daughter into a business asset, and they were about to find out that this asset had a self-destruct button. The room was buzzing with the anticipatory energy of a crowd waiting for a toast, but my focus was entirely on the silent, digital war unfolding on the screen of my phone. Diane had ordered me to put the device away, to play the role of the dutiful, attentive daughter, but the stakes had escalated beyond parental disapproval. I slid the phone back into my hand, shielding it under the edge of the table. My eyes scanned the logistical data that David, my CFO, had pushed to my secure dashboard. The Hearthstone project wasn't just a paper transfer of assets. It was a physical shipment, a massive one. I drilled down into the manifest. The system showed a convoy of 6 high-capacity freight trucks, scheduled to depart from our regional distribution hub in Columbus at 4 a.m. They were carrying specialized medical imaging components, high-value, fragile, and incredibly time-sensitive inventory. The client listed on the manifest was Hearthstone Holdings, LLC, the very same shell company my father was trying to force me to sign over rights to. I did the mental math instantly. The value of the cargo was roughly $8 million. But here was the catch. Northline Operations, my company, was the guarantor. We were ensuring the transit, if those trucks moved, and if the ownership of the company was transferred mid-transit via the fraudulent documents in that Navy box. Any liability for damage or loss would fall on me personally, while the profit would divert to the new owners. My parents weren't just stealing my authority. They were using my own infrastructure to traffic their deal, leaving me with all the risk and none of the reward. I looked at the time. It was 9:25 at night. The warehouse team would be loading those trucks right now. The drivers would be running their final safety checks. If I did nothing, those trucks would leave the dock in less than 7 hours. Once they were on the road, recalling them was a logistical nightmare that required board approval. But right now, they were still on my floor. They were still in my house. I opened the master control app. My thumb hovered over the emergency halt function. In the corporate world, stopping a shipment of this magnitude was the nuclear option. It cost thousands of dollars in delay penalties. It ruined relationships. It was something you only did if the bridge was out or the warehouse was on fire, or if you discovered that the client was committing fraud. I navigated to the Terms of Service submenu, specifically Clause 19, Section C, right to suspend service upon suspicion of unauthorized credential use or financial irregularity. It was a standard clause I had insisted our lawyers include 3 years ago. Frank had mocked it at the time, calling it paranoid over-lawyering. I tapped the screen. Select reason for halt. I scrolled down and selected identity theft, fraudulent authorization. Confirm halt? This will trigger a Level 1 lockdown at the Columbus facility. I looked up. Frank was at the front of the room, raising a champagne glass. He looked triumphant. He looked like a man who had already spent the money he was about to steal. I looked down. Confirm. The screen flashed red. Then it went gray as the command executed. Status, lockdown. All assets frozen. Gate codes revoked. Dispatch suspended. I set the phone down on the table, face up. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The party continued. The music played. The waiters circled with trays of crab cakes. Then, the vibration started. It came from the burnt orange Birkin bag sitting on top of my neat stack of envelopes. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. It was a relentless, aggressive sound against the hard surface of the table. Tessa, who was standing near the fireplace posing for a photo with the investor, didn't hear it at first, but the investor did. He frowned, checking his own pocket, then looked around. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. Tessa finally noticed. She frowned, annoyed that her moment was being interrupted. She excused herself and walked over to the table, her silver dress swishing around her legs. God, who is calling me? She muttered, digging into the bag. I told everyone I was busy. She pulled out her phone. She stared at the screen. Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. Hello? She answered, her voice sharp. I watched her face. What do you mean the gate is locked? She snapped. Just open it. We have a schedule. She listened for a moment, and the color began to drain from her face. What do you mean, system override? No. Do not call the police. Just hold on. Let me ask my dad. She lowered the phone, her hand trembling. She looked across the room at Frank. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She made a frantic, cutting motion across her throat. Frank saw it. His smile vanished. He excused himself from the group and walked quickly toward us. He tried to keep his pace casual, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. What is it? Frank hissed as he reached the table. I am in the middle of a conversation with Halverson. This better be important. The warehouse, Tessa whispered, her voice high and panic-stricken. The driver says the gates just locked automatically. The security system shut down the loading bay. They cannot get the trucks out. The screen says, it says fraud alert. Frank froze. He looked at Tessa. Then he looked at the phone in her hand. And then, slowly, mechanically, he turned his head and looked at me. I was sitting perfectly still, my hands folded on the table next to the navy box. I met his gaze with a level, dispassionate stare. "Sloane," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, looming over the chair to use his height to intimidate me. "What did you do?" "I received a security alert," I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with his jagged whisper. There was unauthorized activity on the account. Someone was attempting to move $8 million of inventory using compromised credentials. Standard protocol is to freeze the assets until the identity of the user can be verified. "Unfreeze it," Frank snarled. "Right now, pick up that phone and unfreeze it." "I cannot do that, Dad," I said. "Once a fraud alert is triggered, it requires a full audit. The legal team has to review the access logs. It will take at least 48 hours, maybe 72. 48 hours? Frank's face went a shade of red I had never seen before. "We have a delivery window of 6 a.m. tomorrow. If those trucks do not move, the contract is void. Do you understand? Void." "Then the person who set up the shipment should have used their own account," I replied. "Instead of trying to hack into mine." "We did not hack you," Tessa shrieked, forgetting to whisper. "We are family. It is the same thing." A few heads turned. "It is not the same thing," I said. "Northline Operations is a separate legal entity. I am the fiduciary. If I allow a shipment to move under suspicious circumstances, I go to jail. I am just protecting my company." "Protecting your company?" Frank laughed, a sound that was dangerously close to unhinged. "You are ruining us. Do you know how much leverage is riding on this? Halverson is expecting that inventory to hit the distribution center by noon. If it is not there, the deal collapses." "That sounds like poor planning on your part," I said. Frank looked like he was about to strike me. His hand twitched at his side. The veins in his neck were bulging against his tuxedo collar. "Fix this," he commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "I do not care about your protocols. You are my daughter. You will do what I tell you." "I am a CEO first tonight, Frank," I said, dropping the title Dad. "And right now, you are a security risk." "Is everything all right here?" Diane had arrived. She had that radar that mothers have for social disasters. She glided between Frank and me, her smile fixed in place like a rictus of terror. She placed a hand on Frank's chest, pushing him back slightly, and another hand on my shoulder. "Lower your voices," she hissed through her teeth, while nodding pleasantly at a guest passing by. "People are staring. Frank, you look like you're having a stroke. Stop it." "She locked the warehouse," Frank choked out. "She froze the shipment." Diane looked at me. The betrayal in her eyes was profound, not because I had done something wrong, but because I had stopped playing along. "Sloane," she said, her voice dripping with disappointed sweetness. "Darling, you are confused. There is no fraud. It is just a misunderstanding. Your father and Tessa were just trying to help the business. Now, be a good girl and call your team. Tell them it was a glitch. We can sort this out later." "It was not a glitch," I said, "and I will not lie to my board." Diane's grip on my shoulder tightened. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing your sister." I am sitting in the corner. "Mom," I said, "I am exactly where you put me. If there is a scene, it is because you three are standing around my table screaming about a shipment you had no right to authorize." Diane looked around. The investor, Halverson, was watching us from across the room. He looked concerned. He checked his watch. Diane realized the danger. If Halverson came over, if he heard the words fraud or lockdown, the game was over. "Okay," Diane said, her voice changing tack instantly. "Okay, we are all a little stressed. Sloane, you need a break. Why don't we move you? Let's go to the kitchen. or the study. It is quieter there. We can sit down and talk about this privately, away from the noise. Come on." She tugged at my arm, trying to physically remove me from the room, trying to pull me into the shadows where they could bully me without witnesses, where the notary was probably waiting. I planted my feet. "No," I said. Diane tugged harder. "Sloan, do not be difficult. Get up." "No," I said, louder this time. I pulled my arm out of her grasp. I picked up the roll of tape. I picked up the inventory list. "You told me to sit here," I said, my voice steady and clear enough to carry over the low hum of the jazz music. "You told me my job was to watch the gifts. You told me to stay out of the way. So I am staying. I am not going to the kitchen. I am not going to the study. I am sitting right here until this party is over." "Sloan," Frank warned, a low growl. "And if you try to make me move," I said, locking eyes with him, "I will stand on this chair and announce exactly why the trucks aren't moving. I will tell Halverson about the bypass codes. I will tell him about the shell company. Do you want to take that risk?" Frank stopped. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Halverson. He looked at me. He realized, for the first time in his life, that he didn't have the leverage. I did. "You ungrateful little," he started, but the words died in his throat. "Go back to your guests." "Frank," I said, turning my attention back to my phone. "I have work to do. I need to file an incident report with the Department of Transportation." Frank turned purple. He looked at Diane. Diane looked pale. "We will deal with you later," Frank spat. "When these people leave, you are finished." "When these people leave," I said, not looking up, "it will be too late." He spun on his heel and stormed off, grabbing Tessa by the arm and dragging her away to do damage control. Diane lingered for a second, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and fear, before smoothing her dress and following them. I was alone at the table again. But the dynamic had shifted. The air around me didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a fortress. My phone pinged, a message from the warehouse manager in Columbus. "Sloan, we have the trucks secured. The drivers are asking what to do. One of them says the client is threatening to sue." I typed back a single sentence. "Let them sue. Nobody moves until I say so." I took a deep breath. The adrenaline was making my hands shake slightly, but my mind was crystal clear. I had fired the warning shot. Now, I had to prepare for the return fire, because Frank Barrett did not lose gracefully, and he still had the notary, and whatever was inside that navy box. I looked at the box. I reached out and tapped the lid. "Your turn," I whispered. The tension in the room following my confrontation with Frank and Diane had not dissipated. It had merely thickened, like milk left out in the sun. My father was currently by the bar, frantically texting, likely trying to find a loophole in the transportation laws, or a lawyer willing to bribe a federal agent at 9:45 on a Saturday night. Tessa was near the DJ booth, laughing too loudly, her eyes darting nervously toward the front door every few seconds. I remained at my post. I had not moved an inch. I sat with my back straight, my hands folded over the inventory list, looking every bit the obedient daughter they had insisted I be. The guests were beginning to sense the undercurrent of panic. I saw hushed whispers exchanged behind champagne flutes. They looked at Frank's red face, then at my isolated table, and back again. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. Then, the heavy oak front doors swung open with a definitive thud that seemed to silence the room faster than any glass tapping could. A man stepped in. He was flanked by 2 assistants, but he commanded the space entirely on his own. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with shock-white hair and a charcoal suit that cost more than the tuition for my entire undergraduate degree. He didn't look like a party guest. He looked like a man who owned the building and was coming to inspect the foundation. It was Grant Halverson. I recognized him immediately from the dossiers I had reviewed. He was the CEO of the Hearthstone Group, the actual money behind the deal my father was trying to close. He was the whale Frank had been chasing for 6 months. Frank saw him and practically sprinted across the room, his tuxedo tails flapping. Grant, you made it." Frank's voice was a little too high, a little too desperate. He reached out a hand, sweating visibly. "We were just talking about you. The party is in full swing. Let me get you a drink. We have a vintage scotch I know you will love." Grant Halverson did not take the offered hand. He didn't even look at the bar. He stood in the center of the foyer, ignoring the festive atmosphere, and looked directly at Frank with eyes like flint. "I am not here for scotch, Frank," Grant said. His voice was a deep baritone that carried effortlessly across the silent room. "My logistics coordinator just called me. She says there is a level 1 hold on the transport manifest. She says the Northline system is flagging our inventory as high risk." Frank paled. "It is just a glitch, Grant, a technical hiccup. We are sorting it out right now. It will be cleared up in 10 minutes. Please, come join the party. Relax." Grant ignored the invitation. He scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over the models, the influencers, the hangers-on, and the desperate socialites. He looked bored by the spectacle. "I do not have time for glitches," Grant stated. "The contract stipulates that the logistics partner must certify the chain of custody personally. I want to hear it from the source. Where is Sloan Barrett?" The name hung in the air. Frank froze. Diane, who had been hovering nearby with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, nearly dropped it. They had spent the entire evening erasing me. They had told everyone I was an assistant, a recluse, a nobody, and now, the most powerful man in the room was asking for me, and only me. "Sloan?" Frank stammered. "Oh, well, she is around, but you do not need to bother her. Grant, she is just handling some administrative things. I can walk you through the—" "I did not ask for you, Frank," Grant cut him off. "I asked for the director of operations. Where is she?" Diane stepped forward, her smile trembling. She realized she couldn't hide me, if she lied, and he found out. The deal was dead. If she told the truth, her social narrative was dead. She chose the money. She raised a manicured hand and pointed a shaky finger toward the back of the room, toward the kitchen door, toward the trash can, toward me. "She is over there," Diane whispered. "By the gifts." Grant turned. The crowd parted as he pivoted. He followed the line of Diane's finger and his eyes landed on me. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just nodded. A professional acknowledgement between equals. Grant stared. He took in the folding chair. He took in the roll of packing tape. He took in the pile of coats on the adjacent table. He took in the sheer, unmistakable disrespect of my positioning. He began to walk. He didn't walk toward the bar or the VIP lounge. He walked straight through the heart of the party, past the staring guests, directly to my corner. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen behind me. When he reached the table, he stopped. He looked down at the inventory list under my hand. "Sloan Barrett?" he asked. "Good evening, Mr. Halverson," I said, remaining seated. "I apologize for not rising to greet you. I have been instructed not to leave this station." Grant looked at the tape dispenser. Then he looked back at Frank, who was trailing behind him like a scolded puppy. "Frank," Grant said, his voice quiet but deadly, "why is the woman responsible for a $12 million supply chain sitting at a card table next to the kitchen?" "She likes it," Frank blurted out. "She prefers to be helpful. She is shy." Grant turned back to me. "Are you shy, Ms. Barrett?" "No," I said clearly. "I am efficient, and currently, I am freezing your shipment because the authorization codes were used by a third party without my consent. I do not move 8 figures of inventory based on a hacked credential." Grant's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Frank with pure disgust. "You tried to bypass her?" "We are a family," Frank argued, his voice cracking. "It is all the same pot of money. She is just being difficult because she wants attention." "No," Grant said. "She is being professional, which is more than I can say for this circus." He placed a hand on the edge of my table. "Ms. Barrett, this is not where a partner sits. This is where you put a coat check girl. It is insulting, not just to you, but to me. If I am doing business with Northline, I expect to deal with the decision maker, not search for her behind a pile of toaster ovens. I agree, I said. Tessa decided this was the moment to save the day. She bounced over. Flashing her brightest, most media-trained smile, she placed a hand on Grant's arm, a gesture so familiar it made him flinch. Hi, I am Tessa, she beamed. I am sure you have seen my Instagram. I am actually the creative lead on this project. Sloan is just the back-end stuff, boring logistics, you know? But the brand? The vision? That is all me. Let me get you a drink, and we can talk about the marketing strategy. Grant looked at Tessa's hand on his arm until she removed it. Young lady, Grant said, his voice flat. I do not move medical components with vision. I move them with trucks. And the person who controls the trucks is the only person in this room I am interested in talking to. I do not care about your Instagram. I care about whether my cargo is going to end up in a ditch or in a hospital. Tessa's smile faltered. She looked at the crowd. Realizing everyone had heard her be dismissed as irrelevant, she stepped back, her face flushing a deep crimson. Frank tried one last desperation play. Grant, listen, the paperwork is ready. We just need to sign the final transfer. Once Sloan signs the rights over to the holding company, you won't have to deal with her anymore. It will all be streamlined, just us men. Grant looked at Frank. I am starting to think that dealing with just you men is exactly why this shipment is currently flagged for fraud. Frank opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Diane saw the cliff edge approaching. She saw the deal teetering. She knew they needed to force the issue right now, before Grant walked out the door. She needed to reclaim the narrative. She needed to make me look like the daughter again, not the CEO. Oh, stop all this business talk, Diane cried out, her voice shrill with forced gaiety. She clapped her hands together, startling a waiter. We are at a party. Grant, you must forgive us. We are just so excited. And actually, this is the perfect moment. She rushed to the table and grabbed the navy blue box. She shoved it toward me. Sloan was just about to open her gift, Diane announced to the room, her eyes wide and manic. It is a very special gift. It signifies the transition we are talking about. It is a promotion. Yes, a promotion for our beloved daughter. She looked at me, her eyes pleading and threatening all at once. Open it. Play along. Save us. Go on, Sloan, Diane urged. Open it for Mr. Halverson. Show him how committed you are to the family. Grant looked at the box. Then he looked at me. He was a smart man. He sensed the trap. Is this necessary? Grant asked me quietly. I looked at the box. I looked at Frank, who was practically vibrating with anxiety. I looked at the notary in the corner, who was clutching his briefcase. If I refused to open it, they would claim I was being petulant. They would claim I was unstable. They would try to gaslight Grant into thinking I was the problem. But if I opened it, the contents would be public record. Yes, I said. I think it is very necessary. I stood up. It was the first time I had stood since the party began. I smoothed my blazer. Mom wants me to open this in front of everyone, I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room. She says it will keep me safe. She says it will solve all the heavy lifting. I ripped the navy paper. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I pulled the lid off the box. Inside, sitting on a bed of black velvet, was not a piece of jewelry. It was not a keepsake. It was a thick stack of legal documents, bound with a heavy clip, and right on top, clearly visible to anyone standing close enough, was a cover sheet in bold, capitalized letters. Irrevocable power of attorney and asset transfer agreement. I reached in and lifted the heavy stack of papers. Wow, I said flatly. You shouldn't have. Diane's smile was frozen, a mask of terror. Read the card. Sloan, it explains everything. There was no card, just the papers, and the pen that was clipped to them. I turned to Grant. Mr. Halverson, It appears my family has gifted me a legal document that strips me of my voting rights in Northline operations and transfers my majority shares to a shell company controlled by my father, and they have graciously included a notary. I pointed to the man in the beige suit, who tried to shrink into the wall, to ensure I sign it tonight, presumably before the alcohol wears off. The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of 50 wealthy people realizing they were witnessing a crime. Grant looked at the papers in my hand. He looked at the title. His face went hard as stone. "Is this true, Frank?" Grant asked. "It is for her own good," Frank yelled, losing all composure. "She works too much. She has no life. We are trying to give her freedom." "By taking her company?" Grant asked. "It is a family asset," Frank screamed. "It is my asset," I corrected, my voice cutting through his noise. "My name is on the incorporation papers. My credit score secured the initial loans. My sweat equity built the logistics network you are trying to sell to Mr. Halverson." I dropped the stack of papers back onto the table. They landed with a heavy final thud. "And frankly," I said, looking at my parents, "I do not think I will be accepting this gift." Grant looked at me, and for the first time, a genuine smile touched his lips. It was a smile of respect. "Ms. Barrett," Grant said, "I think you and I need to have a conversation, alone, away from the help." He cast a withering look at Frank and Tessa. "But first," Grant said, "I believe you were in the middle of a security audit?" "Yes," I said. "I believe I have identified the source of the breach." I picked up my phone. "Shall we finish this?" I asked him. "Please," Grant said, stepping aside to let me pass. "Lead the way." The silence in the room was heavy, a suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb the ambient noise of the air conditioning and the distant clinking of glass from the bar. I stood with the navy box open before me, the gift exposed for what it truly was. The stack of papers was thick, printed on heavy bond legal stock, the kind used for mortgages and death certificates. Frank stepped forward, his hand twitching as he reached into his jacket pocket, likely for a pen he had been keeping warm for this exact moment. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, hacking sound that fooled absolutely no one. "Sloan, honey, do not be dramatic," Frank said, his voice straining to maintain a jovial, fatherly timbre. "You are making this sound like a conspiracy. It is standard estate planning. We are just trying to consolidate the family assets so we can manage the tax burden better. It is to protect your future inheritance." He gestured frantically to the notary in the beige suit. "Mr. Henderson here is just going to witness it. A quick initial on the bottom line, and we can all get back to the champagne. Come on, do it for the family. Keep everything in the house, right?" I ignored his outstretched hand. I ignored the notary who was wiping sweat from his upper lip. My attention was entirely on the document itself. I treated it not as a personal insult, but as a contract sent by a hostile vendor. I flipped the cover page. "Clause 1, I read aloud, my voice steady and projection perfect. "Irrevocable, durable power of attorney." I looked up at Diane. "Do you know what irrevocable means, Mother?" Diane fluttered her hands, her bracelets jangling nervously. It means solid. Sloan. It means we are behind you 100%. We are locking in your security." "No," I said, turning the page. "It means that once I sign this, I cannot take it back. I cannot fire you. I cannot rescind the authority. If I sign this, and 5 minutes later you decide to liquidate the company and bet it all on a horse race, I cannot stop you. It strips me of my legal agency permanently." "We would never do that," Tessa cried out, her voice shrill. "We just want to help you run things. You're always so tired." I kept reading. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, hunting for the kill switch. I found it on page 3, under a section titled Asset Assignment and Management. "Here it is," I said, pointing to the paragraph. "The principal, that is me, hereby transfers all voting rights, majority shareholder privileges, and executive control of Northline operations to the designated agent." I paused, letting the words sink in. And who is the agent? I asked rhetorically. I slid my finger down the page to the bold text. Ah, here we are. The agent is listed as Hearthstone Holdings LLC, a Delaware limited liability company managed by Frank Barrett. I looked up at Grant Halverson. The connection was crude, almost insulting in its transparency. Mr. Halverson, I said, did you know my father named his shell company after your firm? Grant stepped closer to the table. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold fury. No, Ms. Barrett, I did not. It is a tribute, Frank stammered, stepping between us. Grant, it is a gesture of goodwill. We named the holding company to show our commitment to the partnership. It is synergetic branding. It is fraud, I said. You named it Hearthstone Holdings so that when the bank transfers go through, or when the auditors look at the books, they see the name Hearthstone and assume the money is going to Mr. Halverson's legitimate investment group. But it is not. It is going to an LLC solely controlled by you. Grant reached out. May I? I handed him the document. Grant Halverson put on a pair of reading glasses he pulled from his breast pocket. He didn't skim. He read with the precision of a man who had survived 4 decades of corporate warfare. The room watched him. Frank looked like he wanted to snatch the papers away, but he knew that physically wrestling a billionaire for a contract would be the end of his social life forever. Section 4, Paragraph B, Grant read, his voice low and gritty. The agent shall have the unrestricted right to leverage, lien, or sell any and all assets of the principal to secure outside funding, without notice to the principal. Grant looked over his glasses at Frank. You aren't trying to manage her taxes, Frank, Grant said. You are trying to mortgage her company. You wanted to use Northline's inventory and her credit rating as collateral for a loan. Didn't you? That is why you needed the transfer tonight. You have a debt coming due on Monday morning. Frank's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. That is speculative. You do not know the intricacies of our finances. I know that people who are flush with cash do not try to trick their daughters into signing away their rights at a cocktail party, Grant replied. Diane stepped in, her eyes wet with tears that I knew she could summon on command. You are twisting everything. We are parents. We love Sloane. We just want her to be part of something bigger. We built this family. We deserve to share in the success. Why is it so wrong for us to want a piece of the pie? Because you didn't bake the pie, Diane, I said. You didn't even buy the ingredients. I did. I took the papers back from Grant and flipped to the final page. There it was, the smoking gun. Usually, a legal document has a blank line for the date and a blank line for the signature. This one was different. Look at this, I said, holding the page up so the guests nearest to us could see. The date was already filled in, typed, October 12th, today's date. And below the signature line for Sloane Barrett, there was already a stamp, a notary stamp. Mr. Henderson, the man in the beige suit, had pre-stamped the document. He had validated a signature that hadn't even happened yet. That is illegal, I said, looking at the notary. That is immediate disbarment and potential jail time for notarizing a blank document. Mr. Henderson turned a shade of gray, usually reserved for old oatmeal. He snapped his briefcase shut. I was told the signing had already occurred privately. I think I need to leave. Sit down, Grant barked. The authority in his voice was absolute. Mr. Henderson sat back down on the floor, his legs giving out. I turned back to my parents. They were cornered. The narrative of the shy, overwhelmed daughter was dead. The narrative of the family business was dead. All that was left was the ugly, naked greed. You brought me here tonight, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. Not to celebrate me, but to harvest me. You sat me by the gift table to humiliate me, hoping I would be so beaten down, so desperate for a crumb of affection, that I would sign whatever you put in front of me just to make you smile at me for once. Diane sobbed, burying her face in Frank's shoulder. "How can you say that? We gave you life." "And I gave you a credit line," I countered. "I paid off the mortgage on the house you sold. I paid for Tessa's 3 failed startups. I paid for the car you are driving. I have been buying your love for 10 years, hoping that eventually the account would be settled. But it is never enough, is it?" I looked at the document one last time. Hearthstone Holdings, LLC. I read the name again. Clause 7. In the event of the principal's incapacity, the agent assumes full guardianship. I looked at Frank. Incapacity? Were you planning on hitting me over the head if I refused to sign? "It is boilerplate language," Frank shouted. "It is standard." "There is nothing standard about this," Grant interrupted. "I have seen hostile takeovers that were more polite than this. This is cannibalism." Grant turned to the room. The guests were staring, their drinks forgotten. The facade of the perfect Barrett family had shattered, revealing the rot underneath. "I think we have seen enough," Grant announced. "I am pulling the Hearthstone Group's offer. There will be no deal with the Barrett family." Frank grabbed Grant's arm. "No, Grant, please. You cannot do this. We have a verbal agreement. The trucks are loaded." "The trucks are locked," I reminded him, "and they are staying locked." Grant shook Frank off. "I do not do business with people who try to rob their own children. It is bad for the brand." Grant turned to me. "Ms. Barrett, I apologize for my part in this charade. I was led to believe this was a legitimate family enterprise. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush." "You didn't know," I said. "They are very good at hiding things in plain sight." I looked down at the box. The velvet lining looked like a coffin. I picked up the heavy stack of papers. "I am keeping this," I said, "as evidence." "You cannot take that," Tessa screamed, lunging forward. "That is private property." I stepped back, and the security guard, the one who had been watching me earlier, stepped forward. But he didn't step toward me. He stepped toward Tessa, blocking her path. He looked at me and gave a subtle nod. He worked for the venue, not for Frank, and he had heard enough. "I think the lady keeps the papers," the guard said, his voice deep and bored. I looked at my family. Frank was hyperventilating. Diane was crying into a napkin, checking to see if anyone was sympathetic. No one was. Tessa was looking at her phone, probably checking to see if she could delete her social media posts about the big announcement. "This party is over," I said. "At least, my part of it is." I picked up the roll of packing tape from the table, the tool they had given me to keep me busy, to keep me silent. I walked over to the Navy box. I placed the lid back on it, and then, with deliberate, loud motions, I taped the box shut. Zip, tear, stick. I sealed the evidence inside. "I am taking my gift home now," I said. "Thank you for the thought." I turned to walk away, but Grant Halverson fell into step beside me. "Ms. Barrett," he said, "do you have a ride? Or are you driving?" "I drove myself," I said. "I always do." "Good," Grant said. "Walk me out? I think we have some actual business to discuss, assuming you are not too shy to handle a $14 million contract directly." I looked back at the corner where I had spent the last 2 hours. The folding chair looked lonely. The list of guests was fluttering in the draft from the AC. "I think I can manage," I said. We walked toward the door. Behind us, the sound of the party did not resume. There was only the sound of Frank Barrett shouting at a notary, and the sound of a family dynasty crumbling into dust. I did not walk out the door immediately. As Grant Halverson stepped aside to let me lead the way, a cold, pragmatic realization washed over me. Taking the physical box was good, but physical evidence could be stolen, destroyed, or lost by a desperate father or a hired security guard who decided to switch sides for a cash bribe. I needed redundancy. I needed the kind of proof that lived in the cloud, far beyond the reach of Frank Barrett's lighter fluid or shredder. I stopped. I turned back to the table. "One moment, Mr. Halverson," I said, my voice calm. I placed the navy box back onto the table. I ripped the tape I had just applied. The sound was harsh, tearing through the murmurs of the stunned crowd. I pulled the stack of documents out again. "What are you doing?" Diane hissed, her face streaked with mascara. "You said you were leaving. Just go. Get out." "I am preserving the chain of evidence," I replied without looking at her. I pulled my phone out. I opened a document scanning application, one that automatically uploaded to a secure server with a time and date stamp. I laid the first page flat on the table, right next to the untouched inventory list of wedding gifts. Click, the flash was bright. I turned the page. Click. "Stop her!" Frank yelled. He lunged forward, but he did not get far. Grant Halverson simply stepped into his path. Grant did not touch him. He just occupied the space with the immovable gravity of a man whose net worth could buy this entire zip code. Frank bounced off that invisible wall, retreating. "I wouldn't, Frank," Grant warned. "Assaulting a witness in front of 50 people is a poor legal strategy." I continued scanning, clause by clause, the transfer of rights, the power of attorney, the pre-stamped notary block. "You are humiliating us," Tessa cried, tears streaming down her face, though I noticed she was still holding her phone, likely checking to see if anyone was live streaming this. "Why do you have to be so cruel? Why can't you just talk to us like a normal person?" "I am talking to you like a normal person," I said, flipping another page. Click. "But since you have proven to be unreliable narrators of our family history, I am also taking precautions, and just so we are all entirely clear on the legal standing of this interaction, I am stating for the record that I am recording this conversation." I tapped the screen, switching to the voice memo app which was already running in the background. "Ohio is a one-party consent state," I announced to the room. "I am the consenting party. Anything you say from this moment forward is admissible in court." Frank looked at the phone as if it were a loaded gun. The rage in his eyes was battling with self-preservation, and rage was winning. He had been cornered in his own castle, exposed as a fraud in front of the very people he tried to impress. "You think you are so smart," Frank spat, his voice shaking. "You think you can just walk away with everything? Who do you think paid for your education? Sloan? Who put the roof over your head? You owe us. This assets transfer was not theft. It was repayment." "Repayment for what?" I asked, looking up from the document. "For raising me? That is a parental obligation. Frank, not a loan structure." "For the connections," Frank shouted. "For the name. You are a Barrett. That name opens doors. And now, when the family needs liquidity, when we have a chance to secure our legacy, you want to hoard it all for yourself? We have a debt call on Monday morning. $2 million. If we do not have the collateral from Northline, they take the house. They take everything." The room went deadly silent. There it was, the confession. So, I said, ensuring my voice was clear for the microphone, "You admit that you intended to use my company's assets to secure a personal loan to cover a $2 million debt that you incurred independently?" "It is all family money," Frank screamed. "It is all the same pot." "It is not," Grant Halverson interrupted. His voice was like a gavel striking wood. "Mr. Barrett, you just admitted to conspiracy to commit bank fraud. You cannot pledge assets you do not own to secure a debt that is not disclosed to the asset holder. And since Ms. Barrett clearly did not know about this debt, that is criminal intent." Frank blanched. He realized too late that he had just confessed to a felony on a recording that was likely already backing up to a remote server. Diane saw Frank crumbling and decided to deploy the only weapon she had left: emotional devastation. She pushed past Frank, her face a mask of tragic suffering. She dropped to her knees, literally. She knelt on the hardwood floor right next to my folding chair, grabbing the hem of my blazer. "Sloan, please," she wailed. "Look at me. I am your mother. I changed your diapers. I nursed you when you were sick. Do you remember when you broke your arm in 3rd grade? Who sat up with you? Who held your hand?" It was a powerful performance. I saw a few guests look away, uncomfortable. A few others looked sympathetic. It is hard to watch a mother beg her child. "We are desperate," Diane sobbed. "We made mistakes, yes, but we did it for the family. We did it so Tessa could have a chance, so you could be proud of us. Do not destroy us over money. Money is just paper. Family is forever. Just sign the paper. Sloan, save your father, please." I looked down at her. I felt the old pull, the conditioned reflex to fix it, to be the good girl, to make the crying stop. It would be so easy to sign, to make the scene end, to let them hug me and tell me I was a hero. But then I looked at the notary stamp on the paper under my hand. They hadn't asked me to save them. They had tried to trick me into it. They had tried to steal my consent because they didn't respect me enough to ask for it. "Stand up, Diane," I said, cold and sharp. "Sloan, please." "Stand up," I commanded. She flinched and scrambled to her feet, shocked by the steel in my voice. "Do not talk to me about third grade," I said. "Let us talk about last week. You asked me to review the catering contract for this party. I did. I saved you $4,000. You asked me to fix the invite list. I did. And how did you repay me? You sat me by the kitchen door and told people I was socially inept, so they wouldn't ask why the CEO of the company was taping boxes." I gestured to the room. "You did not do this for the family," I continued. "You did this for the image of the family. There is a difference. You sacrificed the actual member of the family, me, to save the image. That is not love, Mother. That is human sacrifice." My phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from David, my CFO. I looked at the screen. He had sent a screenshot of the access log. "Perfect," I said. I turned the phone around so Grant and Frank could see the screen. "This is a time-stamped log from the Northline Operations Security Server," I explained. "At 9:18 this evening, an attempt was made to access the executive transfer portal. The IP address of the device used is logged here." I pointed to the string of numbers. "I just ran a quick trace," I said. "That IP address is registered to the Wi-Fi router in this house, specifically, the guest network." I looked at Tessa. "Tessa," I said, "did Dad ask to borrow your iPad earlier? The one with the LTE connection?" Tessa's eyes widened. She looked at Frank. "You said you needed to check the sports scores." "So," I summarized, "we have a physical document forged with a pre-stamped notary seal. We have a recorded admission of debt and intent to defraud. And we have digital forensics placing the attempted theft at this location, at this time, perpetrated by devices in your possession." I picked up the stack of papers in the Navy box. "This is no longer a family dispute," I said. "This is a RICO case waiting to happen." Frank looked like he was going to vomit. The bravado was gone. The anger was gone. There was only the hollow, terrified look of a man realizing he was about to trade his tuxedo for an orange jumpsuit. "Sloan," Frank whispered, you wouldn't put your father in prison." "That depends entirely on you," I said. I stepped away from the table, creating distance. I held the box like a shield. "Here is the offer," I said. "And I am only making it once because I do not want to spend the next 6 months giving depositions." The room leaned in. Even the waiters stopped clearing glasses. "Option 1, I said. "I hand this evidence to Mr. Halverson's legal team and the district attorney. The trucks stay locked. The deal dies. You go to court for fraud, and likely lose this house and your freedom." Diane let out a strangled whimper. "Option 2, I continued. "You acknowledge right now, in front of Mr. Halverson and these witnesses, that Northline Operations is solely mine. You sign a document, which I will have my lawyers draft tomorrow morning, formally renouncing any claim to my assets, my company, or my future earnings. You will pay off your own debts by selling whatever you have to sell. The car, the jewelry, this rental contract, I do not care." I looked at Tessa. "And you," I said to my sister, "you get a job, a real one, because the Bank of Sloan is closed, permanently." But how will we live?" Diane asked, her voice trembling. "Like everyone else," I said. You will figure it out. That is what adults do. I looked back at Frank. So, prison or poverty? Choose. Frank looked at the guests. He looked at the lavish party that was supposed to be his crowning achievement. He looked at the expensive scotch he hadn't finished. He looked at the life he had built on a foundation of lies and my money. He realized he couldn't charm his way out of this. He couldn't bully his way out. The numbers were on the table, and for the first time, he couldn't cook the books. Frank started, his voice cracking. I choose. We will sign. We will sign whatever you want. He slumped against the wall, defeated. The great Frank Barrett, reduced to a heap of bad decisions in a rented tuxedo. Smart choice, I said. I turned to the notary, Mr. Henderson, who was still sitting on the floor. You, I said, I suggest you destroy that stamp and find a new line of work before the state board calls you on Monday, because I will be reporting this. He nodded frantically, scrambling to pack his briefcase. I turned to Grant. Mr. Halverson, I said, I believe my business here is concluded. If you would like to discuss the legitimate logistics contract, I will be in my office at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. But for now, I am going home. I will be there, Grant said, and he sounded like he meant it. I walked toward the door. I didn't look back at my mother, who was weeping on the floor. I didn't look back at my father, who was staring at his shoes. I didn't look back at Tessa, who was looking at me with a mixture of hatred and awe. I walked past the gift table one last time. I saw the roll of tape. I saw the list of guests. I left them there. They belonged to the help, and I was not the help anymore. The atmosphere in the room shattered the moment Grant Halverson turned his back on my father. It was not a slow fissure, but an immediate, catastrophic structural failure of the evening. The illusion of the Barrett family dynasty, which Frank and Diane had spent 30 years curating like a museum exhibit, collapsed in the span of 3 seconds. Grant did not just walk away. He stopped near the entryway, his silhouette framed by the open door, and turned back to address the room one last time. He did not look at Frank. He looked at the other guests, the bankers, the local politicians, the country club board members. I would advise everyone here to check their portfolios, Grant announced, his voice devoid of anger but heavy with professional disdain. If Frank Barrett has attempted to leverage his daughter's assets without her consent, one must wonder whose assets he used to secure the loans for this venue, or his car, or his other ventures. The Hearthstone Group is officially withdrawing all offers. Good night. He walked out. The silence he left behind lasted exactly 1 heartbeat before the chaos began. Frank stood paralyzed against the wall, his face a rictus of shock. He looked like a man who had been shot, but had not yet realized he was bleeding. Then, the pain hit. You, Frank whispered, pushing himself off the wall. He did not look at the door where the billionaire had just exited. He looked at me. You did this. You chased him away. I protected my company, I replied, tapping the screen of my phone to initiate the next phase of my defense. You vindictive little witch, Frank roared, lunging toward me again, only to be restrained by the security guard, who had now fully defected to my side. That was a $40 million deal. Do you understand what you have done? You just burned $40 million because you were too selfish to share. It was never your money to lose, Frank, I said calmly. It is my family, he screamed, straining against the guard's arm. I am the head of this family. What is yours is mine. That is how it works. You ruined it. You ruined everything because you wanted to play boss. I am the boss, I said, and you are just a liability. The sound of a distinct digital chime cut through his shouting. It was the notification sound for a live stream. Then another phone chimed. Then 3 more. I looked over at the buffet table. A teenage girl, the daughter of one of the neighbors, was holding her phone up, her mouth agape. She wasn't filming now. She was watching something. Oh my God, she whispered. But in the silent room, it carried. It is already on Twitter. Tessa, who had been frantically refreshing her feed, let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. No, Tessa shrieked. No, 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 who posted this? She turned the screen around. A video, taken from a discreet angle near the bar, showed the last 3 minutes of our interaction. It showed Frank screaming about the debt. It showed Diane on her knees begging. It showed me holding the evidence. The caption read, "Barrett Family Gala turns into crime scene. Fraud, Lake Briar, rich people drama." "It has 6,000 views," Tessa wailed, her voice cracking. "My brand deals. I have a partnership with a skincare line pending approval on Monday. They will see this. They will see Dad admitting to bank fraud." "Your skincare partnership is the least of your problems," I said. I looked at my phone. It was time. I had given them a choice, prison or poverty, but until the legal papers were signed, I needed to ensure they had no resources to fight me. I needed to cut the supply lines. I dialed a number. I put it on speakerphone, holding it flat in my hand so everyone could hear the dial tone. "Who are you calling?" Diane asked, wiping her eyes, her mascara leaving black streaks down her cheeks like war paint. "Sloan, stop it. We can fix this. We can put out a statement. We can say it was a skit, a murder mystery game." "Hello, this is David." The voice on the other end answered. It was my CFO. He sounded alert and ready. "David," I said clearly, "execute protocol red. Immediate suspension of all discretionary spending accounts linked to the family trust. I want the corporate credit cards issued to Frank Barrett, Diane Barrett, and Tessa Barrett canceled effective immediately. Mark them as stolen if you have to." "Done," David replied instantly. "I am also revoking the lease authorization on the company vehicles." "Wait," Frank shouted. "You cannot do that. The Range Rover is in my name." "The lease is in the company's name, Frank," I corrected him. "You are just the authorized driver. Or rather, you were." "And David," I continued, "contact the landlord of the Lake Briar rental property. Inform them that the credit card on file for the security deposit has been frozen and will decline any further charges. Tell them that any damages or overages are the sole responsibility of the tenants." "Understood," David said. "Anything else?" "Yes. Flag the insurance policies. Remove all 3 of them from the corporate health plan. They are no longer employees or consultants of Northline operations." "Sloan!" Diane shrieked. "Your father has heart medication. You are killing him." "He can pay for it with his own money," I said. "Goodbye, David." I hung up. The room was now moving. The paralysis had broken, replaced by a desperate need to escape. The guests were not just leaving, they were fleeing. I watched as the woman who had earlier told me I should get married grabbed her husband's arm and practically dragged him toward the door. They didn't say goodbye to Frank. They didn't make eye contact. They just wanted to be as far away as possible before the police arrived. "We have to go." I heard a man whisper to his wife. "If they investigate Frank, they will audit everyone he has done business with. I cannot be seen here." "Let's go out the back," the wife replied. Frank watched them go. He reached out a hand as if to stop them, to offer them a drink, to pull them back into the delusion that this was still a party. "Bill? Sarah?" Frank stammered. "Do not rush off. The cake. We haven't cut the cake." Bill didn't even turn around. The door slammed shut behind them. Then another couple left, then a group of 4. The room emptied with terrifying speed. The music was still playing, a cheerful jazz saxophone loop that sounded grotesque against the reality of the situation. Within 2 minutes, the only people left in the room were the 4 Barretts, the security guard, and the catering staff, who were huddled in the kitchen doorway, looking terrified they wouldn't get paid. Frank slumped into a chair, not the head of the table, but a random guest chair near the spilled drinks. He looked small. The bluster was gone. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only the cold ash of realization. "You took the car," Frank whispered. "How am I supposed to get home?" "Uber," I suggested, "although you might need to download the app and add a card that works." Diane rushed over to me again. She didn't kneel this time. She looked at me with a frightening intensity, her eyes wide and manic. "Sloan, listen to me," she said, her voice trembling. "You have made your point. You won, okay? You won the game. You showed everyone you are the big boss. Now fix it. Call Grant back. Tell him you were just testing us. Tell him we passed the test. Bring the money back." I stared at her. "You still do not get it. There is no money. Mom, the deal is dead. The reputation is dead. It is over." "It cannot be over," she screamed, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me. "We have nothing. The house proceeds are gone. We spent it on the down payments. We have the club dues, the leases. If you cut us off, we are destitute." I removed her hands from my shoulders. I did it gently, but firmly. "Then you should have thought about that before you tried to steal my company," I said. "We are your parents," she wailed. "We deserve to be taken care of." "You had a child so you would have a retirement plan," I said. "That was your mistake. I am not an annuity. I am a person." Tessa was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the ruin of her social life. She looked up at me, her eyes red. "You hate us," Tessa said quietly. "You have always hated us because we are happy, and you are miserable." "I do not hate you, Tessa," I said. "I pity you. You are 26 years old and you do not know how to pay a phone bill. And now, you are going to have to learn very quickly." I looked at the stack of envelopes on the gift table, the checks, the cash, the donations from the guests who had fled. Frank's eyes darted to them too. He started to rise. "Do not even think about it," I said. I turned to the security guard. "What is your name?" I asked him. "Marcus, ma'am," he said. "Marcus, I am hiring you personally for the next 12 hours. I said. "My rate is double whatever Frank promised you, and I pay in cash. Tonight." Marcus nodded immediately. "I am on the clock, Ms. Barrett." "Good. Secure those gifts," I ordered. "Log them, and then return every single one of them to the guests tomorrow morning. Send a note apologizing for the cancellation of the event and the behavior of the hosts." "No," Frank shouted. "Those are gifts. They are ours." "They were gifts for a celebration of a fraud," I said. "We are returning them. It is the only ethical thing to do, and it is the only thing that might save a shred of the family name, though I doubt it." Frank put his head in his hands and began to sob. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was the ugly, heaving sob of a man who knows he has hit rock bottom and has no ladder. "I am ruined," he choked out. "I am going to jail." "Only if you do not sign the papers my lawyer sends over on Monday," I reminded him. "If you sign, if you walk away, I will not press charges. I will let you keep your freedom. But you will never touch a dime of my money again." I looked around the room one last time. The decorations looked cheap now. The flowers were wilting. The half-eaten food on the tables looked repulsive. This was the kingdom they had built. A facade of luxury held together by my labor and their lies, and I had just pulled the keystone. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the crushing weight of knowing I had destroyed my family. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt lighter. I felt the way I felt when I cleared a backlog of shipping manifests. I felt clean. I adjusted my blazer. I picked up my phone. I didn't need the tape anymore. I didn't need the list. "Marcus," I said, "make sure they do not drive. Call them a cab if they can pay for it. If not, well, it is a nice night for a walk." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. I turned my back on them. "Sloan," Diane screamed one last time. "If you walk out that door, you are dead to us. Do not come back. Do not come to Christmas. Do not call us when you are lonely." I stopped at the threshold. The night air was cool and smelled of the lake and pine trees. It smelled like freedom. I didn't turn around. I just spoke to the open air. "Do not worry, Mother," I said. "I won't." I walked out onto the stone steps. The valet was gone. He had likely left when the tip jar remained empty, but my car was parked right at the front. I walked toward it, my heels clicking on the pavement. I didn't run. I didn't look back at the house where the lights were still blazing on a party that had turned into a wake. I reached my car. I unlocked it. I got in. For a moment, I just sat there in the silence of the driver's seat. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were steady. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up. The GPS asked for a destination. I didn't put in my apartment. I didn't put in the office. I typed in the airport. I had a logistics conference in London next week. I had planned to skip it to help Frank with his post-party organization. I decided I would go early. I would fly first class. I would drink champagne that I bought with my own money. And I would toast to the fact that for the first time in 32 years, the only person I had to manage was myself. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, the house shrank smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light in the darkness. And then, finally, it was gone. The heavy oak doors had slammed shut behind the last fleeing guest, but the echoes seemed to rattle the crystal chandeliers that hung above us like frozen tears. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the pressurized silence of a bomb that had detonated, leaving only the ringing in your ears. My family stood amidst the wreckage of their social ambitions. Frank was trembling, his face a mottled map of rage and ruin. Diane was clutching a napkin, her eyes darting around the empty room as if she could hallucinate the guests back into existence. Tessa was staring at her phone, watching her digital life implode in real time. "You," Frank hissed, his voice vibrating with a dangerous frequency. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. "You ungrateful, treacherous snake. You destroyed it. You destroyed the reputation I spent 40 years building. Get out. Get out of my house before I call the police and have you dragged out for trespassing." "Stop," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I spoke the word with the flat, absolute authority of a judge delivering a sentence. I said, "Be quiet." Frank blinked, startled by the sheer coldness of my tone. He opened his mouth to roar again, but I cut him off. "I want everyone to listen very carefully," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the corners of the cavernous room where the catering staff were freezing in place. "Because I am only going to explain the reality of your situation once." I reached into my blazer pocket. I didn't pull out a weapon, but in the world of the Barretts, what I held was far more lethal. It was a folded piece of paper. "You told me to get out of your house," I said, unfolding the document. "But that is the problem. Frank, this isn't your house. It isn't even your rental." "Of course it is mine," Frank sputtered. "I booked it. I spoke to the agent." "You spoke to the agent," I corrected him. "But when they ran your credit card 3 days ago for the security deposit, the one for $15,000, it was declined. Do you remember that? You told Mom it was a banking error." Diane looked at Frank. Frank looked away. "The agency was going to cancel the booking," I continued, smoothing the paper on the gift table. "They called the secondary contact on the file. That was me. Because you needed someone with a credit score over 700 to co-sign. I turned the document around so they could see the signature at the bottom. I paid the deposit, Frank," I said, "and I signed the liability waiver, which means, legally speaking, for the next 12 hours, I am the primary leaseholder of this property. I am the host." I took a step forward, invading his personal space for the first time. "So, nobody is kicking me out," I said. "In fact, I am the only reason you are not standing on the sidewalk right now." The color drained from Frank's face until he looked like a ghost. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. He wasn't the lord of the manor banishing the servant. He was the squatter. Grant Halverson, who had remained near the doorway, cleared his throat. He walked back into the center of the room. He didn't look at Frank. He looked at me. "Ms. Barrett," Grant said, his voice deep and resonant. "I want to be perfectly clear about the future of our business relationship, in front of witnesses." He turned to Frank and Diane. "I came here tonight to acquire a logistics network," Grant stated. "I was told it was a family business. I see now that was a lie. Northline Operations is not a family business. It is a Sloan Barrett business." Grant reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the table next to the Navy box I had sealed. "Sloan," Grant said, using my first name with the respect of a peer. The Hearthstone Group formally recognizes you as the sole proprietor and executive authority of Northline. We will draft the new contracts on Monday. My legal team will ensure there are clauses specifically barring any interference from third parties. Thank you, Grant, I said. He cannot do that, Tessa screamed, jumping to her feet. Dad is the chairman. It is on the website. The website I built? I asked. The one hosted on the server I pay for? I will have that corrected by tomorrow morning. Tessa slumped back down, defeated. Diane looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. She looked at the empty hall, the ruined party, the furious billionaire, and the daughter she had treated like furniture. She realized that the furniture was the only thing holding up the roof. Sloane, Diane whispered, her voice trembling. Please, we can work this out. We can restructure. You can be the CEO. We will take a step back. Just do not lock us out. We are your family. You are not my family, I said. You are my dependents, and I am resigning from that position. I picked up the Navy box containing the evidence of their fraud. It felt heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of 10 years of manipulation. Here are my final instructions, I said. I pointed to the catering staff. You all have been paid in full, including the overtime. You can pack up and leave. Leave the mess. Do not clean a single glass. The head waiter nodded at me, a look of profound relief on his face. Thank you, ma'am. I turned to Marcus, the security guard. Marcus, you are in charge of the premises until the rental period expires at 10 in the morning. Ensure that no property belonging to the venue is removed or damaged. If Mr. Barrett tries to take a painting or a silver spoon to pawn, call the sheriff. Understood, Marcus said, crossing his arms and glaring at Frank. Finally, I looked at my parents. You have until 10 in the morning to vacate, I said. I suggest you use that time to start looking for a smaller apartment, much smaller. Where are you going? Diane cried out as I turned away. Sloane, who is going to drive us? Who is going to fix this? I stopped. I was standing next to the gift table, the place where I had spent the entire evening, the corner where they had tried to hide me. I looked down at the table one last time. I saw the roll of clear packing tape. I saw the black marker. I saw the list of guests who had come to worship a false idol and fled when the truth was revealed. For years, I had been the tape. I was the transparent, invisible thing that held their fragile, broken lives together. I had taped over their cracks. I had taped over their debts. I had taped over their mistakes so the world wouldn't see how hollow they were inside. I reached out and picked up the tape dispenser. I looked at Frank. Fix it yourself. I dropped the tape into the trash can. It landed with a hollow thud among the discarded napkins and empty shrimp tails. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of lightness. The gravity that had held me in their orbit for 32 years had finally snapped. I turned my back on the table. I turned my back on the corner. Goodbye, I said. I walked across the polished marble floor. My heels clicked with a steady, rhythmic beat that sounded like a countdown ending. Sloane, Frank shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Come back here. I command you. I am your father. I didn't break stride. I didn't flinch. His voice was just noise now. It was static on a radio channel I had finally turned off. I reached the heavy front doors. Marcus held one open for me. Have a good night, Ms. Barrett, he said. It is, Marcus, I replied. It really is. I stepped out into the night air. The cool wind hit my face, carrying the scent of rain and pine. The sky was vast and dark, dotted with stars that didn't care about social status or bank accounts. I walked to my car, the only thing I truly owned, the only vehicle that was going exactly where I wanted it to go. I got in, tossed the box of evidence onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. I saw the silhouette of my father standing in the doorway, small and shrinking against the light of the house he didn't own. I turned the corner, and he was gone. I drove toward the highway, toward the airport, toward London, toward a life where I would never, ever sit at the kids' table again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I want to connect and share thoughts with all of you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.